Welcome to episode 25 of Escape the Rat Race Radio. I'm your host, Christian Rodwell, and this is your ticket to escape the 9 to 5.
The people who have really great meaning and purpose understand that when they articulate that meaning and purpose, what they can do is they can get other people involved, and then together they can build kind of like movements which really make a massive impact on our world. True purpose is human. In other words, true purpose goes beyond your product or service. Second thing, differentiation comes from clarity of why. And the third thing that is really, really important is that your why must absolutely be front and center. So it is a very important thing to find.
On today's episode of Escape the Rat Race Radio, I have a very, very special guest indeed. I have Mr. Paul Dunn. Now, for many people, Paul may not be a name that you instantly recognize. However, Paul is a 4 times TEDx speaker, award-winning entrepreneur, and master presenter who travels around the world. Paul has received numerous honors for his work. He's the recipient of a Global Lifetime Achievement Award for service to the accounting profession, even though you'll find out that he's very definitely not an accountant. And Paul is also a senior fellow of one of the world's leading business think tanks and is now a fellow of Singapore's Social Innovation Forum, which is an honor he shares with film star Jet Li and Wal-Mart chairman Rob Walton. Now, Paul's work as chairman of the revolutionary B1G1 has been featured in leading edge publications such as Forbes, Fast Company, Trend Watching, Springwise, and online through the key technology newsletter Mashable, as well as Voice of America. And B1G1 is a social enterprise, a non-profit organization with a mission to create a world full of giving. We talk about this in depth in today's conversation. And unlike conventional giving models, B1G1 helps small and medium-sized businesses achieve more social impact by embedding giving activities into their everyday business operations, which create very unique giving stories indeed. I also asked Paul the big question of how do you find your why? And Paul shares a very concise method, which he said came from a conversation that he had with the author of Start With Why, Mr. Simon Sinek, which I'm sure you're going to find super helpful. So I'm so excited to share today's conversation with you. So let's not wait around any longer. Let's head over to my interview with Mr. Paul Dunn. Welcome, Paul, to Escape the Rat Race Radio. How are you today?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here in all sorts of ways. But, you know, I'm on one side of the planet. You're on the other. Right now, I'm in Australia looking over a golf course. That's not because I play golf. That's because I'm speaking in the morning at this lovely resort down on Australia's east coast. But lovely speaking with you in London, which, of course, is where we met, a couple of weeks ago.
Well, we did indeed, Paul, and we were both at Roger Hamilton's fantastic Fast Forward Summit. And of course, you were on stage speaking, sharing your story with everyone there. And it was great to see so many familiar faces. And Daniel Priestley was also on stage. And of course, Roger and Daniel have both been previous guests on Escape the Rat Race Radio. So it's a real pleasure to finally have you on here, Paul, as well.
That's fantastic. And one day you must ask Daniel about the story as to how he met Roger and how he got to end up in London and all of that kind of stuff, because I was quite involved in that, shall we say. So, but I'll let Daniel tell the story. So,
Paul, we know you as a hugely respected and admired business leader, a speaker that's in high demand to talk at some huge events across the world with some of the world's other thought leaders. So for those who are listening now, who perhaps haven't had the pleasure of hanging out in the company of Paul Dunn, would you mind telling them a little bit about yourself and the business that you're most focused on and involved with today?
Oh, well, historically, of course, as you know, I'm now the chairman of this incredible initiative, and many people are referring to it as a movement, which is called B1G1. Some people in England want to call it Biggie, but it's B1G1 because it actually stands for Buy One, Give One. So it's this incredible, as I said, movement that if you could imagine, which is what we're doing, actually, we're imagining a very different world. So if you can imagine, someone today buying, for example, let's say a plasma TV somewhere, wouldn't it be great if when they did that, someone who could not see got the gift of sight? Wouldn't it be great if someone was buying a book today? And wouldn't it be great if, as a result of that, a tree got planted? Wouldn't it be great if, you and I were having a cup of coffee somewhere and some kids, as a result of that, some kids got access to pure life-saving water? So that was the idea that sprung up in 2007. And it sounds like a simple idea, right? Where every transaction that we make gives back or gives in some amazing way. It was actually quite difficult to make that happen. It sounds very simple, but it was actually quite difficult to create an entity to do that as of today. And hopefully the people who are escaping or who have escaped the rat race would understand that they never ever should doubt that tiny things make just amazing differences. And I talk about that in what I call the power of small. And the reason I mention that, Christian, is that as of today, let's see, it's 117 million giving impacts that have flown to date from that simple idea. So that's what I do these days, and it's just an extraordinary privilege to be able to do that.
Well, that's incredible, Paul, and of course, massive congratulations for reaching such a huge milestone at B1G1. And I recall seeing you share online just only what feels like a matter of weeks ago that you'd crossed the 100 million mark. And to hear now that's already at 117 million is testament, I think, to the network of members that are contributing towards those wonderful giving impacts every day across the world. And it's clearly gathering some real pace now.
Oh yeah, very much so. But it's interesting, because for a number of years, I done 4 TEDx talks and so on, and as you probably also know, some years ago I was one of the first 10 in Hewlett-Packard in Australia, even though I was born in the United Kingdom. What's interesting is that these days we are seeing more and more people, let's say, escaping the rat race, but really realizing that which they're doing really does not have any meaning and purpose. And in a sense, that occurred to me way back a long time ago, actually now, actually not that long ago, in about 2006. I had sold all of my business interests in 2000, theoretically to retire, but since you know me now, you would realize that was very difficult to do. So I wrote some books. And then I realized something happened to me where I realized that if you'd have said to me way back then, if you'd have said to me, so what's a successful business all about? At that time in my life, Christian, I would have said, well, my experience is this. My experience is that for me, I'm not saying it should be for you, but for me, it was all about 2 things. Those 2 things were adding enormous value to the people that I was privileged to serve. And secondly, having fun doing what I do. And then something happened to me, and you heard a bit of that story a couple of weeks ago, where I suddenly realized it had to do with the 2004 tsunami, actually. And when I realized that, hang on a second, here am I leading this very privileged life and enjoying every minute of it. But maybe there's something else here. Maybe we have an obligation to do something else. And there was a particular incident which happened that made me realize that. And then as a result of that, then B1G1 came out of a mentoring session that I was running for a lady called Masami Sato, who actually founded B1G1. She founded it in a mentoring session I was running for. It's such a powerful idea that I remember saying to her, can I be your mentor for the rest of your life? And so, yeah, it's been amazing. And what is so interesting now is that we are seeing, I'm in Australia right now, and I just looked up the stats, and the stats are pretty interesting. Every hour in a country of 20 million people, every hour, the net gain, that is to say that, some businesses are failing, some businesses are being created. Every hour, there are 87 businesses. Every hour of every day, there are 87 businesses being created. That's the net. There would be more than that being created, but some of them would be failing. And what that speaks to is this incredible thing that's going on where people are getting home at the end of the day and they're saying, is that all there is? So there's this search, if you like, for meaning and purpose. And that's why so many people are, quote unquote, escaping the rat race, to not just to do their own thing, but to do their own thing and make a difference as they do it. And B1G1, of course, is playing a huge part in helping people do that.
Yes, it certainly is, Paul. And I definitely want to dive deeper into exactly how B1G1 is helping so many people and how our listeners can get involved in that if they wish to, through contributing through their own businesses. But I'd like to just rewind for a second, Paul, because you've been extremely successful in business over the last 40 years. You mentioned there that you were one of the first 10 people at Hewlett-Packard when it launched. And I'm interested to hear from you, Paul, how you believe the entrepreneur movement has developed and grown pace, because you travel globally and experience many different cultures. So are you seeing this drive and desire within people to break free of the traditional 9 to 5 of working for someone else across the world? Or is this just in pockets that you see at the moment?
Oh, no. It's everywhere because, it's never been easier to do it. And I think we are really understanding, everything. I mean, if you go back to, for example, 2008, when there was this so-called global financial crisis, and what we learned at that point, sadly, although maybe happily we learned, that we couldn't trust the entities that we thought we could trust. We thought we could trust the big banks, for example. We realized we couldn't. We thought we could trust governments. We realized we couldn't. We had a sense that we couldn't, but we realized we couldn't really do that. And so what it boiled down to was that the only people we could actually trust was ourselves. And then, all sorts of movements, as you know, that took place where, we were really understanding that because of the technological changes and all sorts of other things that were going on, almost like a perfect storm, that the individual really could create incredible things, could very, very easily connect right across the world in a heartbeat. It wouldn't cost them a cent to do it. And so, when I remember when, as you said, a fair while ago, probably before you were born, Christian, when I started this, I don't think the word entrepreneur even existed. I really don't think it did. But now people are really realizing that there's never been a time like this. I like what Peter Diamandis says. The creator of the X Prize and the guy from Singularity U. And he says, there's never been a time like this. And he says that in this decade that we're in now, we will actually create or entrepreneurs will actually create, just in this decade, more wealth for themselves and for society than the entire 20th century. So we're seeing now that the individual can just do, stunning things. And we're also understanding at the same time that we kind of understand that we can't do it ourselves, that we actually need to collaborate. And it's so much easier now to collaborate and get people attracted to the kind of things that you're doing. So you can really make what Steve Jobs referred to as a dent in the universe. Funny thing, actually, talking about Steve Jobs, it just happened that a friend of mine sent me a quote from Steve Jobs just this instant, actually, before we started talking here. And it's a wonderful quote. And it says this: "Let's go invent tomorrow rather than worry about what happened yesterday." I love that. And I think more and more people are understanding that that's now possible, and it's more possible than it's ever been.
They are indeed. And for our listeners, Paul, we talk about entrepreneurship a lot, and I'd love to find out what your definition of a true entrepreneur is, because sometimes we hear people referring to people who have just quit their job and become self-employed and really just own their own job now, and they're working twice the amount of hours and earning half the amount of money that they were before. So what defines an entrepreneur in your mind, Paul?
There's all sorts of entrepreneurs, and you identified one of them. The person that goes out there and, as you say, effectively buys themselves a job, probably not a good thing to do. I think the biggest thing, I know this is taking a different take on your question, but I think that the biggest part now of people who are entrepreneurs is what I would call social entrepreneurs. That leads me to the definition that what they're doing is they're seeing, so here's an entrepreneur, right? This is the definition of a social entrepreneur. So it's someone who looks around and looks at a challenge, a problem, a something that exists, and then looks and goes, you know what? I could make a difference to that. I really could. And then they formulate their plans. They realize, I think increasingly, the people who have really great meaning and purpose understand that when they articulate that meaning and purpose, what they can do is they can get other people involved, and then together they can build kind of like movements or social entrepreneurs, if you like, together, which really make a massive impact on our world. In fact, I think that if you and I were having this conversation, let's say 8 to 10 years from now, there will only actually be one form of business, and that's what Muhammad Yunus, who, interestingly, if you think about Muhammad Yunus, he's very interesting, actually. You know, the guy who is widely regarded as inventing microcredits, and he refers to what he talks about social business. I think that, and by the way, interesting enough, the United Nations, as you know, honored him with the Nobel Peace Prize, or the Nobel, not the United Nations, but the Nobel people honored him with the Peace Prize. The first entrepreneur ever to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And it was this wonderful recognition that as entrepreneurs, we impact so much in the world. Because from his perspective, what he was doing was eliminating poverty, because poverty is one of these great things that, and we're seeing it, all day, really. But it just divides people rather than brings them together. And so I think that the time that we're in now, where, as you well know, some people are focusing on nationalistic agendas rather than really understanding that we're all one. I mean, that's the reality. We all are one. And I think we'll finally get that, and that there will only be one sort of business, and it will be a social business.
I have the pleasure of speaking to so many great people through hosting this podcast who have really discovered their why and are truly living their life's purpose. However, when I ask clients that I'm working with, our members of Escape the Rat Race, that big question of what's your purpose, what's your why, can be a really difficult one for people to answer. Through your career, Paul, you've mentored hundreds, if not thousands of individuals. How have you dealt with that question, and how have you helped people personally to really dig deep inside themselves and discover their why and what they were put on this earth for? Do you have any tips or techniques that you could share with us around that at all, Paul?
I love that question. I absolutely love that question, because I spend, as you say, I mentor a whole lot of people around the world. And let me just defer for a minute to a friend of mine that I know so many people would have heard of, and that is Simon Sinek, as in he who wrote, Start With Why. In some private conversations with me, Simon has really laid it out very clearly. So I'll show you how, very simply in a minute, how you get to it. But let me give you a couple of interesting kind of big picture things first. So the thing that we really need to understand first up is that true purpose is human. In other words, true purpose goes beyond your product or service. True purpose is always human. Second thing, differentiation comes from clarity of why. In other words, it's not about the features and benefits and all that kind of stuff that we traditionally think it is. It actually comes from clarity of why. And the third thing that is really, really important is that your why must absolutely be front and center. So it is a very important thing to find. And it's actually, I'll show you a simple way of doing it. And so the simple way to do it, and by the way, those of you listening to this on, for example, an iPhone or a smartphone, let me tell you what I want you to do, and then you can pause the podcast. I know I shouldn't say that they should do that, Christian, but you could actually pause the podcast, and you could say, if you had iOS 11 or the iPhone, you could say, "Hey Siri," but you don't need actually to do that. You just say, "Open Voice Memo" or "Open Voice Recorder," depending upon the number of the operating system that you have. So if you do that, and the same thing is true on your Samsung or whatever it is, I'm not quite sure how you do it, but there is a little app on there that will record things. And so you get that record app, you're just sitting there and you've got your finger over the button. And here's what you do. You simply say the following words. This is really the key to getting your why, seriously. And so hopefully this particular podcast, Christian, will be one that becomes very famous, because in the middle of it, you can get your why, right? So so here you do it. Here's what you do. So you press that record button and you say the following words. You say, "I get up every morning too," and then you complete the sentence. So it goes, I get up every morning to blah, 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 blah. Now, the first time you do it, it will sound something like this. I get up every morning to, oh my God, why did I press record? I have no idea why I get up every morning. Right? And then you'll sort of ditch that one, and then you'll get a little bit clearer and a little bit clearer. And then if you're lucky, it will come out, fairly quickly. But what I don't want you to do is to go, oh my gosh, I didn't find it. I'm going to really stress and really do, recording after recording. Don't do that. It turns out that once you start the process, it will just pop. It really will just pop. Then, just to show you how to get on track with this, let me give you a couple of examples. Some people, women, for example, women are really good at this, particularly women who have children, as you'll see in a minute. A lot of women say things like, well, I get up every morning to be a great example for my children. Now, you and I might look at that and say, well, that's really cool. Now, if someone said that to me, I would actually say to them, well, good for you. Right? Good for you, but because it doesn't involve me. What I want us all to do, remember, all purpose is human, is just add 2 words to whatever it is you come up with. So it sounds like this. I get up every morning to, for example, be a great example for my children so that they will inspire the people that they connect with today, so that together we can actually make a dent in this community and, in fact, in our world. Now, if you said that to me, I would go, wow, I'd want to be a part of that. You see what I'm saying? So all of a sudden you've got it off yourself just through those 2 words, which are called so that. And then there's another thing that happens just really, really quickly, where people go, oh my gosh, Paul, that's really a big ask, because you're asking me to define my purpose. And that's really big, because a lot of us, Christian, we get this idea that the purpose is the kind of thing that people talk about when we finally leave this life, right? Like, so when they put you in the ground, they say, oh, this is what motivated Christian, for example. Sometimes it becomes very difficult because people think that, they think that, for example, their why will not change. That's not true. They also think that we're asking them to define what it looks like at the end of their life. That's also not true. And if you think about that, that becomes like really, really hard to do. So here are 2 words that will make it much easier. And they're 3-letter words, and you put them right at the front. So now, instead of saying, I get up, if you have difficulty, right? So instead of saying, I get up every morning to whatever, just put these 2 words at the front. And the 2 words are for now. So now it becomes, for now, I get up every morning to, and then whatever it is you've said. And the beauty of that is that your mind can now shorten that down into, the next week, the next 30 days, the next 90 days, or whatever it is, so that at least you get on purpose for that particular time, not necessarily meaning it's there for the end of your life.
Makes me think about the hotly debated subject of lack of entrepreneur education within schools. And what you've just shared with us there, Paul, is something that I think many parents will want to pass on and share with their children. I'd just love to get your thoughts on why it seems to be proving so difficult to introduce new entrepreneurial content, money management, and the importance of collaboration to shake up our traditional school systems.
Well, it's interesting you ask that, because just in recent times, I mean, first of all, you're right, but just in recent times, I've seen some amazing things happen with children of entrepreneurs. And there's one in particular that there's actually a lot of them now. I work with people who work with a lot of kids who are, let's say from 10 to 17. And they're going into the schools and they're talking about their own entrepreneurial journey. And what's really, really interesting is they're actually creating cohorts, I suppose that's the word, of kids who are actually setting up their own entrepreneurship things right there. I mean, there's this little 10-year-old, his name, funnily enough, is Digger, and he's got this site which is called Your Secret Source, actually it's called, Your Secret Source. And what that is just the opportunity for kids to come online and they're going to start a story. And so, so someone writes a paragraph and then someone else gets another paragraph and so on and so on and so forth. Right? And kids are jumping all over those sorts of things. So I'm seeing people like Shanette, whom you met on the weekend, who's, working with school teachers saying, hang on, there's a different way of doing this. So I think you're right that the problem exists. I think the good thing is that we're recognizing the problem and we're stepping up to it. So, for example, one of the things that people can do right now, and they can do it, go have a look at something called the Green School. Just have a look at that, and right out of there, the Green School, which happens to be in Bali, and also just go look at this NALU, NALU, NALU dot. Let me just check where this nalu.me. I think it may be. Let me just check that. And as I'm looking for it, let me tell you what NALU is. NALU it started by a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old. There you go. It is that, nalu.me. Just go there, https nalu.me. And when you go there, you'll see that it's a fashion brand, and how that fashion brand actually existed. And I'm looking at their page right now, and at the top it's called Dress to Give. Isn't that really cool? And so Dali, the young lady who was 16 when she founded it together with her brother, Finn, who's 12 years old, what happened there is a classic example of entrepreneurship in action. So their parents happened to take them when they were smaller. They happened to take them to India. And they made some friends in school in India and so on and so forth. And then when they passed the age of 11, they went back into India, and they went to the schools to try and find their school friends. And what they discovered was that those friends that they'd made were not in school. And the reason they were not in school is that although in India primary education is free, then secondary education is quote unquote free, but you have to have a uniform to go. And so many kids are so poor that their families can't afford the uniform, so therefore they don't go to school. And Finn and Dali thought there's got to be a way of us fixing this. And so they created initially a T-shirt company, and they said that for every 4 T-shirts that we sell, a kid in India is going to get a brand new school uniform. And they've grown that. In fact, Dali, the young lady, she's now working with Donna Karan, believe it or not, who's actually mentoring these kids and a whole lot of other people as well. And their goal is to give 1 million uniforms. Think about that for a minute. 1 million uniforms by 2020. And they're 16 and 12. So it's an amazing story. I should put a disclaimer there right now, because there they were, trying to figure out how to deliver the T-shirts, right? Deliver the uniforms. And then someone who had joined B1G1 said, oh my gosh, we need to connect with Dali and with Finn. So they are now full B1G1 members. And so they're no longer having to worry about, how do we do the uniforms? Because obviously within B1G1, that just happens to be some of the projects that we have that are doing that right across the world, not just in India.
Yeah, that really is cool. And would you mind then, Paul, sharing a bit about exactly how B1G1 operates? For those who are listening who haven't come across Buy One, Give One, and you mentioned earlier a little bit about how the initial idea for the company first came about, but how does it actually operate? For all those small business owners who are listening now and they're looking for a way to contribute and give back in some way, but traditional charities maybe just not ticking the box for them in quite the right way. How does B1G1 differ in that respect, Paul?
The first thing that, in order to answer it, let me just try and erase some of the ways that we think about giving, because typically what we do, we go, oh, I see. So I'm going to create an entity, and my entity is going to proudly support some charity or other. Now, I'm not saying that that's wrong, but I'm saying there's no judgment in what I just said, but that's the way that most people think about it. So then they go, oh my goodness, I've got to do all the due diligence and all of that kind of stuff and blah, 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 blah. And of course, many times they never get around to it. So what B1G1 does is say, well, actually, there's some very, very interesting things that happen. So for a start, you can actually give in B1G1 across 800 seriously high impact projects. I mean, and the board of B1G1 rejects 6 out of every 7. That's the current count of projects that apply to be a part of B1G1. So you know that these projects are really, really cool projects. Secondly, you can actually give to something that your customer happens to be interested in. So, for example, let's suppose we talked about teachers earlier on. So let's suppose some way that, let's take Jeanette as a case in point, who's working with teachers. Wouldn't it be kind of interesting if every time she did whatever it was, that she was able to say, kid just got access to e-learning to totally change their outcomes? Wouldn't it be interesting if you were doing something in, let's say, the health space, and you were able to say, just by virtue of what we did, when we sold this product, when we connected with this customer, wouldn't it be interesting if you were able to say, in fact, a guy that I was literally just with just before we came online here, his name is Adam Houlihan. Anybody who's listening to this should instantly connect with Adam Houlihan on LinkedIn. Houlihan. Now, when you connect on to Adam, you know what? I really shouldn't tell you what's going to happen. I won't tell you what's happened. Go do it. You'll just be amazed. You'll be amazed at what you did, what actually happened when you connected with Adam. Christian, because you've seen it on the bottom of my emails, but it's actually on the bottom of thousands of people's emails now, which says, just by sending this email, a kid got access to pure life-saving water. All of these different things that we can do. Second thing or third thing is that we used to think that, giving has got to involve lots of dollars and all of that kind of stuff. In B1G1, you can actually give from 1 cent, literally from 1 cent. 1 cent makes a difference. Not only that, when you give in B1G1, fully 100% of your giving goes where you want it to go. And really, really cool, the techies will love this, we actually track every single solitary impact that you make. And so you can use that to put up a real-time map, for example, automatically on your website and so on.
So that brings part 1 of my interview with Paul to a close, and we've still got a whole second part waiting in the wings for you, which will be coming out next week as episode 26. So not too long to wait to hear the rest of what Paul has to share. And in part 2, Paul shares a story about attending a Jim Rohn seminar back in 1980 and how that experience helped to set him on such a successful path that he so enjoys today. Whilst you're waiting for next week's episode to arrive on your smartphones, I would highly encourage you to go and check out b1g1.com and take a look at all of the amazing projects that Paul spoke about, and that they're available there for you to work with, and find out just how easy that is for you to get involved into. Now, if you have any comments or feedback from listening to our conversation today, I'd love to hear from you, and you can email me directly by dropping me a message using chris@etrr.online. Well, that's it for today. Be good and be giving, and until next week, see ya.